Now, a lot of Catholics and Orthodox will accuse Protestants of being schismatics, but really, it's really just a straw man, honestly. Because the ultimate factor is, when you study how the Reformation happened, it is pretty clear that the reformers were not going around planting churches. They didn't say, "Oh, the Catholic Church is corrupt and we don't agree with its theology, so we're just going to leave and plant a bunch of parallel churches around Europe because we don't like them." Right? That's what a lot of modern conservative Christians do when they don't like what a church is doing. That's what's going on right now within the Anglican Church. But is that the Protestant heritage? No. The Protestant reformers very clearly believed in institutional church. They always were reforming existing churches. I'm pretty sure there weren't actually new churches being planted that were Protestant until the English Reformation. And the English Reformation was when Congregationalists and Baptists started planting new churches. The only people who were planting new churches during the Reformation, both the English Reformation and the broader Protestant Reformation during the 1500s, was the Anabaptists, because they were trying to restart Christianity from scratch. And the Protestants were harsher on the Anabaptists than they were on the Catholics, because they believed in an institutional church. The only reason the Protestant reformers left the Catholic Church in the first place is because they were infallibly excommunicated for their beliefs. They were never trying to secede off and create Martin Luther's Free Bible Church in Germany. That was not a thing. That was never a goal of any of the reformers. They were always trying to reform existing churches because they were like, yo, I don't agree with these practices, but I still believe in there's an institutional church. Martin Luther believed that. John Calvin believed that. John Knox believed that. Thomas Cranmer believed that. Heinrich Bullinger, Peter Martyr Vermigli, like all of these famous reformers believed in an institutional church. And again, the only reason they even exist as a separate institution is because they got infallibly excommunicated. The individual reformers got infallibly excommunicated, and then a bunch of churches were like, "Oh, so these guys are excommunicated, so we're going to follow them and leave them because we agree with them." Right? And so and if you read the Bible, it's like, that is a pretty clear case of an okay time to leave. Okay? That because it is not a voluntary schism. The Protestant Reformation was not a voluntary schism. The Anabaptist Revolution was 100% a voluntary schism. A lot of the things that the Baptists were doing during the English Reformation, and a lot of the things that the Congregationalists were doing during the English Reformation, was voluntary schism. It was voluntary schism and non-conformity, right? The only real example of technically a voluntary schism that happened is when King Henry VIII voluntarily schismed from Rome over wanting a divorce. But that wasn't really that a lot of people will strawman Anglicanism as oh, your church got founded because you wanted a divorce. No, because that was only him cutting ties with Rome. That wasn't the actual start of Anglicanism as it's having its own separate identity in theology. That was started by Thomas Cranmer, right? So, and again, Thomas Cranmer didn't voluntarily schism. He was again, all of these guys were reforming existing churches. So a lot of people will accuse everything that's going on within the mainline churches or evangelical churches as just the logical result of Protestantism, because they consider Protestantism to be schismatic. No. I will agree with them that what is going on right now in American Christianity is the logical conclusion of voluntary schism. However, traditional Protestant heritage does not come from voluntary schism. And I think that's pretty clear when you study history. So I would really appreciate my Orthodox and Catholic brothers in Christ to stop strawmanning traditional, historic, confessional Protestants and calling us schismatics. We are not schismatics, okay? You can call evangelicals and Anabaptist schismatics because they 1000% are. They do not believe in an institutional church, and they're very retreatist, and they just like to plant new churches all the time and not have really any sort of real kingdom impact on the church, right? So I would agree with you, those guys are schismatics, okay? But Martin Luther's not a schismatic. John Calvin is not a schismatic, okay? If you read their writings and you study church history, it's pretty clear that these guys were involuntarily excommunicated, okay? And I think that that's a valid reason to leave the church if you are infallibly excommunicated by the Pope, okay? So I would, again, Orthodox brothers and sisters in Christ, please stop strawmanning Protestants.